Okay, from our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip from Gantom Lighting and Controls, and I'm joined, as always, by my delightful co-host Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tag, we look at the top news each week, and we explain why it matters to business professionals in the themed entertainment and themed park space. And this week, we're going to talk about the Comcast earnings call, some of the takeaways for the theme parks division from that.
Wait, no Six Flags? What the hell?
No, you know what? We're going to get to Six Flags, so I want to compare. We are finally getting comments on the YouTube, though, asking why we don't talk about other things. And so I'm glad it's finally moved into the opposite direction.
There we go. All right, sorry. Comcast. Let's talk about Comcast, Philip, because, you've done a lot of work on this.
So the Comcast earnings, I did listen to the call and notate it. And I wrote a few articles about it. And if I'm going to try and boil this down, it's really good news for Comcast almost across the board. Like it'd be hard for you to point to anything that's too crazy, except maybe some softening demand in Asia for the theme park only division. That's the only storm cloud on the horizon. But I think the biggest story about this is, of course, that they are really stemming their losses in broadband. So their broadband losses are sharply declining because they're starting to turn that revenue segment around. And they're saying that the Peacock could be profitable by next quarter. So the two huge chunks of their business, the broadband turning around is enormous for them in that. And then, of course, in the theme parks division, theme parks park revenue is up 24%. 24%. And it's not all, but it's mostly driven by Epic, right? And so what they talked about was the whole theory that they put forth in the beginning, and you and I talked about how hopefully it works, is that theory where adding Epic could actually increase spending resort-wide because it would encourage people to stay for the whole time and to come for Universal only instead of Universal and Disney. And it would make it into a week-long vacation and add all this stuff. And it seems like that's working because they said revenue was up at all the areas as a direct result, of Epic. So
yeah, that's been something that Universal has been talking about for many, many years. And the only reason I know that is back in the day, they were saying how their goal was to be not the day trip, but the reason to come to Orlando. That was their goal, and they felt that they had to get a certain level of critical mass, which is true, and they had to have enough for people to do so that when they came, they could have their full week filled up by nothing but Universal. And I think that Epic has finally tipped that over the top, and to hear that it's now at a 24% revenue increase. That's due mostly to Epic. That's a good sign. So they finally hit. That's always been their goal. As long as I've known people at Universal, that has been their goal.
Yep. They on the call they said that Epic is expanding the overall guest experience and helping to position Universal Orlando as a true week-long destination. They also added how they do have investments planned. They talked about the Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift that's opening up in Hollywood. They also talked about the upcoming Universal Kids Park that's coming in Frisco, Texas. And of course, they mentioned that the UK park is progressing through the final planning approvals on site. And they also did mention in Japan, which we can talk about with Asia, but they talked about the Pokemon experiences that will debut at some point. And that's something that they announced a while ago at the beginning of the year as part of Universal Cool Japan. So Universal Cool Japan is this program they've had for 10 years. It started in 2015, so about 10 or 11 years. And it's this basically it's a programming slate that they do every year, but it is drawn from Japan created IP. And then they bring it into Universal. So it's like a highlighting local work and type of thing. And so in January, they mentioned how they were going to do an expanded Pokemon experience, but they didn't give any details, but he did mention it on this call again. And so that's interesting. It's good. It's good because it's it must be a big thing then, or, it's coming down the pipeline because he mentioned it in terms of the pipeline. But I think it also goes back to the softening Asia demand type thing where they are, in my view, I think that the way to combat the softening demand in those markets is probably going to be engaging with your locals. And of course, Pokemon is a huge thing in Japan. So I think he's nodding towards that. He's kind of nodding without giving too many details, but he's nodding at how they are investing in things the locals would want to go to in Asia.
Right. No, that makes total sense. I mean, it kind of goes back to the discussion we had about Six Flags, bringing back the park presidents who, so that each park has an understanding of their local demographic.
That's right.
People, there are certain, in Japan, people are very excited about seeing Japanese homegrown product and content. And so, yeah, it makes total sense. I think it's very, very wise. So I'm curious to see, of course, being here in Florida, I'm curious to see that how the already announced expansions to Epic are going to impact things. Because, anecdotally, there's a lot of people who are still feeling as though Epic is not a full day. There's not enough there. And again, people have been saying this since 3 years before it opened. So, but again, what we're seeing here is that really doesn't matter, because if people are coming and staying on Universal property, they'll do maybe, they may have planned to do a full day at Epic and decide, I've had enough of the sun. I'm going to go back to the pool. And then tomorrow, instead of going back to Epic, I'm going to go to Islands or Studios. So
that was a big takeaway for me, is that concept. I think we're insiders. And so I think sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees, because our whole world is what these parks are doing, because it's literally our livelihood, quite literally. And everybody that we know works in these experiences. And so we are dissecting, the shape of the tree and where the trash cans are. And I mean, and the theming of this and the storyline of that. And so we're all in here. But I think that a big takeaway for me was it kind of doesn't matter what any of us think, or, objectively speaking, some of the online reviews for Epic have not been great. And even I on the show was kind of poo-pooing it earlier because I went during summer and there was no shade. And, I had this whole thing about it. But it doesn't matter, because it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it's doing it really, really well. It's increasing per cap. It's increasing length of stay. It's generally making everything more positive, basically, like the guest feedback about the whole trips on average have been increasing. So it's doing its job. I mean, that's literally its job, is to do all of those things.
It's the straw that broke the camel's back when people are trying to make a decision as to where to go. And now they want to go there. They want to go to Universal properties and stay on Universal property, or in one of the Universal hotels. And even though Epic is kind of in the suburbs of Universal property, there are still connections and easy ways to get there, and so it's become the shiny toy that has made all of Universal parks, or all the Universal parks in Florida, more appealing. It's the thing everybody's talking about.
Well, speaking of that, or kind of the idea of travel to it, so they were asked about how the Iran conflict was going to impact demand and if that's showing up or not. It's just important to note that this call was for the first quarter, which ended on March 31st, right? So they haven't had really the numbers yet. They're not disclosing numbers yet. And what they did say, I think the most telling thing they said, is that inbound international travel to the US parks is something that has not ever gotten back to level we saw pre-COVID, which I know I've heard that before, but it's kind of startling to keep hearing that brought back up. And he said, inside the US, domestic to domestic, we haven't yet seen any significant impact in the parks business caused by higher oil. But I think that does not mean that it may not happen, depending on the duration of the effect on price of gas, airline tickets, and so forth. And they mentioned it twice, actually, about where we could see it later. It just really depends on the time that prices stay elevated. So they did mention it twice, but they did try to moderate that a little bit by pointing out that they're really excited about some of the big events that are coming up, like the Olympics, the NFL Sunday, the Super Bowl. And so they said, as we look forward to LA, we've got tremendous enthusiasm and excitement for how that could keep the ecosystem very robust. We have a good roadmap ahead of us. So they acknowledged that this could be showing up later, but they did try and kind of even it out by being like, we have reason to be excited because there's big events that we're planning for.
Well, once again, I think we have to take off our insider hat and put on our tourist hat and say, yeah, we've had this booked for 2 years. We're not going to cancel it now just because it's going to cost us a little bit more. Where you're going to see, where I think you're going to see the impact is even further down the road, people looking at now trying to plan for 2 years from now, going, wow, well, if it stays, if the oil prices stay like this, if all of the transportation costs are going to be this high, gosh, maybe we better look at something closer to home, because people who travel to go to either Disney or Universal, they don't, in most cases, they don't just pick up and say, hey, we're going to go tomorrow. They plan it for, at least a few months, if not a year or two out.
It's a big purchase, basically. Yeah,
it's a big purchase. And it's, I think back to when I was a kid living in Illinois, and, the first time we went to Walt Disney World, well, it was just the Magic Kingdom and 2 hotels back then. But when we first went to that, we started planning, 6 months out. So no matter what happened between the time that we started planning and the time we were scheduled to go, it would have taken some rather significant changes to happen, and not just a raise in the price of oil to get us to cancel the trip. So that makes sense to me that there's not been a domestic, drop off because of oil prices, because again, things have been changing so quickly, and these are the kinds of trips that you plan quite a ways out.
Well, yeah. Speaking of that, I wanted to explain the softening in Beijing, where you're talking about this, how guests are choosing to go to trips. I think it could be a little bit different internationally into how they make the calculation for going to trips or not. What they said is that they're seeing a softening in Beijing and Osaka. He said, specifically in Osaka, we're seeing some impact from China-related inbound travel trends, which is putting pressure on attendance. And in Beijing, we're navigating a more challenging macroeconomic environment. Which is
define that for me, because that's just, to me, that's a bunch of malarkey that is thrown out there to confuse people who they want to be confused. So help me understand that.
So I will. Okay, I'm glad you asked me. So we're going to just put a little disclaimer where this is my interpretation.
Okay.
My interpretation.
Again, I think that's buzzword bingo. I think that's a lot of, here's something that makes me sound really intelligent and like I know what I'm doing.
Right.
But I'm not really able to tell you the truth. That's what it sounds like to me.
Numbers in Asia are not good, and they're not getting better. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But part of it is the Iran conflict, because the energy costs are hitting there much more. So when they say challenging macroeconomic environment in Beijing, that's what that's referring to. It's referring to they're not exporting jet fuel anymore, that the prices are much higher. That then there's the other side of it where China was quite deliberately discouraging people to go to Japan because they're angry at Japan, because Japan was kind of putting up some pro-Taiwan independence sentiment. And so China got really angry about that. And so China has been actively discouraging their citizens from traveling to Japan. And so they're a lot closer, right? So that market of China inbound travel into Japan has been shrinking. And now it's compounded because you already have the government being like, no, don't leave. But then also now the flight costs are, you think flights are expensive here. Like you think they're expensive here. You should look at those. And so I think that's, plus you get the other thing where it's wealth distribution. It's still not, yes, it's cheaper to visit Japan, but also a lot of the families in China make less money than US families, right? So you got all these, factors, but that's what it is. And I think it's impossible for them to say that on a call. Like you can't, like, that's too, but that's how I see is what's going on there, is there's that. And so again, I'm putting words into their mouth, but I think that you and I have talked about this because it's the same thing we're talking about with the regional parks here. Mm-hmm. How do you combat it it's like, I think a good way to think of it is like Canadian traffic to some of our stuff here, right? So many markets used to get huge Canadian traffic. That's sort of what it's like where you get China going into these places. And so they're like, we lost all of that. So what do? You focus on the locals and you focus on value. We've talked about that. And I think that's what they're trying to do in Osaka. And I think they're hinting that it's not going to work in Beijing. And that's why they're saying challenging macroeconomic, because
Got it.
because it's hard right now in Beijing. So that's going to be hard. But I think in Osaka, you saw them launch the partnership with Frieren, which I wrote an article about that too. But basically, it's opening up next month, and it's a walkthrough experience that's themed to Frieren, which is a really popular anime and manga series. Over 30 million copies of the novel sold, and then the anime just finished season 2, and it is the most highly rated anime on my anime list, which tracks all anime. And it's an incredible story. I watched it. Also, it really fits in well with the theme of the 25th anniversary, which is discovering you, because the whole story about Frieren is about self-discovery. So it's quite literally thematically very linked. So they're making a walkthrough experience. They're making a restaurant. They're doing ride overlays. So they're doing that kind of stuff.
Japanese content to re-encourage or reinvigorate the local Japanese market.
And they're able to do it quickly. And that's a thing that we struggle with here in the US, where they're able to capture the zeitgeist of the moment, because Frieren just wrapped. So they're going to launch it in May, and season 2 just finished airing last month, right? So it's a quick turnaround where they can bring in the characters and bring in the content and overlay it. And that's probably just because of their unique position in the market, where they have relationships.
I would also guess, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I would also guess, because I've actually made this comment to my friends who produce film and games. Stop trying to make film and games, start trying to make a brand. So my guess is they already had plans as to how can we make this a pop-up experience or a walkthrough experience. That was all built in. And if you're smart, that's what you're doing. That was all built into the original plan. So you didn't have to really even wait for it to wrap. You already had, like we've talked about so many times, have parallel plans in place. Yep. And so that way, the moment it hits, or if you need to promote it some more, if it doesn't hit, then you can turn to these other ways of experiencing the same content. It makes so much sense to me.
It makes a lot of sense. Well, and that's the point, is I think that it makes so much sense. It's like to bring Six Flags back in, right? We keep talking about it's not necessarily rocket science, it's just doing it. And I think that that's what the USJ does well, because they've been doing this program for 10 years. And every year, then it's like you're saying, they already know, they have it planned into their operations, they're going to do something. Maybe the exact IP or the exact script will change up to the last minute, but the basic outlines are there so that it allows them to prepare for it. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. It's like they knew they were going to do something, and they had the plan for it.
I would venture to say that they've got preliminary contracts with multiple anime IPs that, and they're just going to look at and go, okay, whichever one hits this, whatever their margin of success is, whatever one hits this indice, benchmark first, that's going to be the one that we're going to go with. They're again, parallel planning. Right. It's not just for disasters anymore.
Yes. Or everything is a disaster, so you can. But yeah, it's I think Frieren is the latest example, but they've been doing this thing every few months, as part of the Universal Cool Japan, because the Cool Japan basically runs like January through end of summer, before fall. And so it kind of gives them this nice little frame that they can just kind of insert the different activations, but it encourages people to come back. And especially if you're a Frieren fan, it gives you that's the other thing we talked about, that critical mass. It gives you just enough, right? Because it's not just one thing. There's the walkthrough, which is original content, part of the story. That's great. It's themed to the anime. I read a whole article about it. It's really cool. But there's also the restaurant, which is an overlay, but there's special dishes, and each dish is themed into the things that the characters love to eat in the series. So it really is well thought out. And then there's a ride overlay with custom audio recorded by the actors, and they put that in one of the rides. And then there's merch and there's churros. So you have enough.
And there's merch and there's churros.
Yeah,
I think that should be the name of like a how-to book on overlays. Then there's merch. Then there's churros.
We should write that book.
Actually. There you go. We'll do that. So let me ask though, Philip, because I know you've experienced this. This sounds parallel to what's going on at Universal California with FanFest nights. How do these two compare? I mean, are they?
That was a really good segue, Scott. Oh, congratulations!
Thank you, Philip. I do my best. Even a blind hog will find an acorn now and then. I'll get them occasionally, but because I know you've experienced it, I have seen video of it, and we talked about it briefly on the show a couple times, but you've actually seen it, so it sounds like it's theoretically the same thing. Is it?
I think that FanFest nights, no. Yes and no. Yes and no. It is in that it uses IPs. It is not in that FanFest nights is the spring version of Halloween Horror Nights. So it is a hard ticket event that is happening after hours.
It's the Americanized version. In America, we're not going to give anybody anything. We've got to sell them an extra ticket. So
right. And I think that is a big... Right, that's a big difference because the Universal Cool Japan is included, and it also happens throughout. So they basically swap them out. So they're like, here's the Pokemon thing, and then here's this thing, and then each a few month and a half or whatever they swap them out. For FanFest, it's only 1 month ish, and it is a separate ticket. So pass holders have to pay extra. Same thing. It follows all the HHN rules, right? And the other part I would say is that on the Zeitgeist thing, I think maybe not quite. It's not quite. Let's say it's not as nimble because they're not swapping out kind of in real time at USJ. They're kind of locked into this thing, and it's only open for a month, so it's not as nimble. And so I think you can see that in their IP choices. So this year, we talked about FanFest last year. This year, their headline is Universal Monsters with Scooby-Doo. So it's like the Scooby-Doo gang and Universal Monsters in a mystery caper together. And then there's a One Piece and Sailor Moon and Harry Potter and Super Mario and Jurassic. And you'll notice that more than half of them are things they already kind of do during the day. So they're really just IP. Like the Harry Potter is like an extension of Harry Potter, right? I mean, it's not like they're not new IPs, right? In that sense, right? They're not like so the only ones they don't offer during the day normally it's the Sailor Moon, and which is a meet and greet and a 4D show they took from Japan, 4D video they took from Japan, and then the One Piece element, which they also lifted partially from Japan. They just shortened it. Again, they Americanized it. Wherein in Japan, it's a full stage show that has a story that is about an hour long. They converted that to a 18-minute stunt show that follows similar beats to Waterworld and put it in the Waterworld stage. And then they have meet and greets. So the only things the only like IPs they don't normally touch, I guess, are the Sailor Moon and the One Piece, but all the other ones are stuff they do. And so back to our argument we made last year, I just think it's interesting their year two is different in that I'm not sure it's bringing in new fans other than One Piece, because all of the other fandoms that they're activating are things that they already do at Universal.
Well, so to me, what that's saying is this year they're looking. The decisions are being made based off of the accountant's books, because they're looking at it going, well, we've already got these people. How do we get more money out of them?
Yeah,
it's money versus driving the attendance or expanding the interest of the park to different fandoms. what is the? So I haven't even seen it. I've seen video of the One Piece stunt show, which looks. I mean, I'll be honest. It looks really cute. I mean,
it's incredible. It is the best thing at FanFest nights by a pretty large margin, I would say. It's incredible. The effects, especially, like, it's not just Waterworld effects. Like they pull effects from the anime. So there's like, this is actually one anime I haven't watched. So please, haters or whatever, you can comment on how ignorant I am if you want. But basically, I know that there are, special attacks, and they do this, they recreate the special attacks, but IRL. And so one of them is a giant glowing sword. So the guy will actually he activates the sword, and as he runs his hand across the blade, the entire sword lights up while he's doing that. And then there's another man who kind of his hands disconnect, and he can use them to go do attacks. And so the hands are their own puppets. And so they fly off of his arms, and they go around and they cause chaos. And just seeing those stage effects, I mean, those are great stage effects to have at this, at this theme park show. Effectively, these are they were really cool effects. And then there's all of the fighting and the swords, and it's not just the water and the fire, right? It's mm-hmm. these effects that are created to mimic the anime, which I think is what really sets that apart. And then the night that I went, the show was so popular, they opened up the line for the seating 45 minutes before the showing, and it reached capacity for all the shows. Yep. And they were doing meet and greets with the characters in between the shows. They had 3 showings. They were doing meet and greets with the characters, and every time I checked on it, which was most of the night, the meet and greet lines were at capacity, right? So same with Sailor Moon, right? Sailor Moon was at capacity the entire night.
These are the 2 that they don't have during regular operating hours.
That's right.
And clearly there is interest in them. So we may see the pendulum swing, I'm guessing. We may see the pendulum swing back next year to, looking at where their true guest satisfaction was in the IPs that they don't necessarily normally use or have access to. Yeah, I've seen, it's funny because I saw just a very brief video clip of Sailor Moon, and the thing that impressed me the most is it was her actually walking to her meet and greet, and she was surrounded. She had more handlers than the president. She was completely surrounded on all sides, but she was very polite and waving to everybody, of course. But the guest response was huge. And I didn't think Sailor Moon was still that viable, but clearly I'm wrong.
It is, and again, I think you have to consider this probably wouldn't work in Orlando. I think that's the other big part of this, and I'm unsure if they even need to, because we've talked about this before, where the idea that it's just different in Orlando, and how they need more seasonal stuff in Hollywood. But that's one of those things, the popularity of some of these anime stuff is just so much greater in SoCal because we have a huge Asian population, but also a base that's interested in anime. And and
it's also the home of so many anime conventions. If they're gonna do Orlando, they actually, in my opinion, based on the conventions that hit hard here, things like Spooky Empire, things like
MegaCon,
they need to go dark if they're going to make them work here. In Orlando, and the darker the better. So
the before we leave the show, because we're getting to the end of time, I just wanted to wrap up the kind of the big picture about the earnings. Just put it into context for everybody, just to understand that, again, we're forest for the trees. We're so in the theme park world. The theme parks are still only 7% of Comcast, and in previous earnings, I think they were really highlighting the growth of theme parks because their other businesses were performing so poorly. But now that the other stuff is doing well, it seems like they're kind of moderating that a little bit. Somebody on the call asked about how they were going to allocate capital. Are you going to be putting more capital in the theme parks because of profitability or these other things? And they kind of said no. They basically said that broadband net losses have improved, and it's the first improvement they've had since 2020. So it's a big deal for them. And it seems like they're leaning into that by just saying that they're, they have six major growth drivers, of which the theme parks are one. And they basically just said that whatever money the theme parks generates, we'll be able to use that to help put more. But that's, which is very different from saying that we're going to keep investing or give them a blank check or, do whatever. Right. Before it was like, oh, they're going to have to make a whole new business model. And now it's like the theme parks are doing great. And if they make money, we'll put that money and they'll make new things with the money that they make. It's kind of like their own business,
Well,
just
let
like
them
the
opposite of what Disney was saying that we were talking about,
yes.
On the show here a couple weeks ago. But, I guess it doesn't matter to me as long as the companies are making money so that the parks can continue. I often tell my clients, what does sustainability look like? Is that short-term profit? Is it long-term profit? Is it, continued guest satisfaction? And it sounds like, based on this earnings call, the parks are very sustainable because they are part of a much larger company that can support them. I mean, that many theme parks started because they were supporting a much larger or different organization, whether it was film-based or beer-based or whatever. And then the theme parks grew out of that. So they had that parachute, they had that safety net just in case anything went wrong. But I don't think anything went wrong in this show, and it's fair of me to say that because we're at the end of it. So, guys, thank you once again so much for watching Green Tag Theme Park in 30. On behalf of Philip Hernandez with Gantom Lighting and Control, and myself, Scott Swenson with Scott Swenson Creative Development, this has been Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we'll see all of you next week. See ya.